Hello folks, Happy New Year. Hopefully you were safe last night and you had a good time going out if you did go out, or if you stayed in like me because you refused to pay to get into places that you don't normally need to pay to get into. Yes, that is a thing in the UK. Pubs actually charge you to go in on New Year's Eve. No thank you. If maybe it doesn't happen where you are, it does where I live, so that's why I don't bother. But I hope you were all safe and that you had a good time either way. Happy New Year, welcome to 2025, and I thought I'd start us off with a long-form hobby nightmare. You're all probably recovering from hangovers or something else or whatever it is you've been getting up to. So sit back, relax, try and nurse your tummy as I go into this very, very, very long hobby nightmare from Jay. So, I'm going to take a sip of my tea and we're going to get on with this thing. Lovely. He says, and he's separated this hobby nightmare into several different pages and several different subheadings, which is really nice to read, so thank you very much, Jay. He says, the Getting to Know Me section. Hey North, feel free to call me Jay. I'm in my late 20s and have an on and off interest in Warhammer. My current run in the hobby is the first time I've properly absorbed myself in the lore and tried to paint correctly. I have recently returned to the hobby after years of dabbling as a child and then again just before my first year of university. Your channel has been the perfect companion during my hobby time. I raise a beer to you, sir, and thank you very much for keeping me entertained on countless late nights, hunched over with a paintbrush in my hand. Despite the horror stories, I am really looking forward to attempting to play the game once my painting has improved to a level I am happy with. Alright, cool. My fiancée has also been introduced to your channel, and despite not being in the 40k hobby herself, she is a huge nerd, so enjoys the content nonetheless. I remain hopeful of getting her into painting one day. I suspect she would be drawn to the Eldari, or Sisters of Battle, likely painted in a hot pink scheme. I fondly remember getting my first box of Warhammer Fantasy Orc Boys around the age of 7 or 8. I had little interest in correctly painting a colour scheme, or even assembling models properly. My poor Orc Boys were glued together randomly, before being slopped in thick, viscous shining gold. I was a real magpie, and obviously loved looking at my splendid golden orcs. Later on, I had a few random boxes of Dark Elves, Dwarves, and Empire, which were all painted a little better. I think I was around 12 or 13 at this stage. I still really miss the old Citadel paint pots, and wish the paint still smelled the way it used to. It is a real nostalgia trip for me when I think about slapping thick blood red and bolt gun metal onto my Empire rank and file infantry. But we aren't here to discuss me, so let's get on to the subject of my hobby nightmare. Meeting Ron. The subject of today's story is Ron. For anonymity's sake, this is not his real name. As you'll soon discover, Ron is a man of great imagination, poor boundaries, and non-existent shame. I cannot tell you all the hilarious stories I have after 20-ish years of knowing him, because I think they are too gross for the channel, and I'm sure you'd not believe them. Not to mention, only a handful are related to Warhammer or other hobbies in general. I am in no way referring to anything illegal or dangerous, but Ron has a penchant for leading an absurd life and getting me caught up in it. I think if my little knowledge of lore is correct, he would be best friends with Nurgle. Interpret that however you wish. Yeah, I don't think me and Ron would get on, let's put it that way. I think our friendship was strong, because I was very measured and sensible, whereas he was erratic and unpredictable. I'd bring him back down to earth, and he'd get me into interesting situations. Dude, that's me and another friend of mine. Yeah, you wouldn't think that I'm more of an outgoing person, but I am. I'm quite he's very logical, and my friend is very, very logical and calm, right? His literal name's, like, his nickname's Steady, you know. Whereas I'm very passionate, and I'm very opinionated, and I'll talk about things, and go over things, and there are some times where he brings me back down to earth, but there are other times where I G him up, because he needs it, right? We're like yin and yang that way, you know, we fill in each other's blind spots quite well, which I quite like, it's pretty cool. Anyway, I will, however, try to flesh out his overall character with some more channel-friendly stories to give you an idea of the type of guy he is. I promise, as bad as it might begin to sound, I think it is funny overall. It's been a long time, so I'll be filling in the blanks as best I can to tell the stories as close to the truth as I can remember it. I first met Ron in Year 2 during primary school. Ron had joined our school after moving from the coast to our little village. I cannot repeat the first words he said to me, but they were troubling enough for me to go and tell the teachers about it, because the subject was something a normal primary schooler would have no knowledge of. My mother was on the staff and found out, so from that moment on, my parents never approved of our friendship, but kind of tolerated it. It's kind of bad to, like, judge a young kid by what he said when he was, like, really young. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, throughout primary school, I was Ron's only friend. I wasn't one of the cool kids, but I got along with everybody. I was throughout my school years a stealth nerd. Ron was my outlet for the nerdy interests I had, which at this stage includes Warhammer, video games, and WWE. Dude, you like to describe me. Don't say that. Whenever we hung out, we'd be doing something dorky. Our first story is Pink Mist. One thing I will say, though, is that when a kid... You have to be very careful. Like, when a kid in school says something that is, shall we say, more adult in nature, something that they shouldn't know about, that is a huge alarm bell for most teachers. Like including myself. That is the first time you're like, what is going on at home that this person knows this? You know what I mean? Yeah, so be very, very careful. Anyway, Pink Mist. Our first encounter with Warhammer was around this time, and we'd sometimes bring our models to school and play toy soldiers at lunch. We didn't know the actual rules to Warhammer, but we would have fun making our own rules and battles up on the spot. I had an assortment of models, as I mentioned earlier, and I think Ron had some Tomb Kings. Ron had fewer models than I did, and expressed snide jealousy even at this young age, a trait he would carry throughout the 20 plus years of our friendship. At this time, it manifested as trying to make me trade models, 2 or 3 of my gold orcs for one of his Tomb Kings because, and I quote, it will make our battles more evenly matched, unquote, or something along those lines. This behaviour continued every week for a while, but he especially got pissed off one lunchtime at school that I will never forget. After the usual rejection, which was always which I was always nice about, Ron decided that he didn't want to play anymore and insisted we went to play on the Trim Trail. For those who don't know what a Trim Trail is, it's a sort of wooden obstacle course with posts and stuff. Google it if you're interested, as it's hard to explain, but it will be important later on. On this particular day, Ron had a pepperami stick in his lunchbox. I don't remember exactly how the next event transpired, as it was 20 years ago, but it went a little like this. Ron was voraciously eating his pepperami stick. At some point, I must have turned away with my back towards him. "Jay," he says. Yeah? I reply as I turn to face him. The next thing I remember is only what I can only describe as the sound of a blown balloon makes when you let it go, as it flies around and it ejects in the air. A flurried, wet, meaty mist of chewed up pepperami covers my face. He chewed and then spat the entire thing at me. Okay, what I'm gonna say, this not nice, this dude. But what I will say is, even at this age, this kind of behavior isn't normal. All right, take it from somebody who's educated kids. This isn't normal. This person needs help. Because they're a child. If this was somebody who was like in their teens, they would be getting slapped across the playground and back again. I scream as I wipe the horrid meat off my face. Ron is pissing himself laughing. I don't remember being angry or why he did it. I suspect it was another manifestation of his jealousy. Yeah, it was. All because I didn't want to play any of his shitty Tomb Kings. I was probably relieved that the pepperami had gotten on me and not my models. But anyway. Our next story, Ron invents pre-orders. Alright. A few years later, we are both in year 6 at school. Ron would have been 11, and I would have been 10 years old. I do not think we'd both been interested in Warhammer the entire time we'd been at primary school, but at some point, we'd gotten back into it. I think around this time, I was pretty much into Dark Elves. Ron had gotten himself some Space Marines over Christmas. The first day back into the new school year, I remember being shown these plastic super soldiers, drowned in dry, thick red paint, and thinking to myself, damn, what are these? I had never explored the 40k side of the models. Initially, I thought these were an entirely different model / range or franchise altogether. I'd only ever known Warhammer Fantasy. Ron got me up to speed on what 40k was, and a general overview of who the Space Marines were. Not all Space Marines are the same. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of chapters with different colour schemes, Rob informed me, and these are Blood Angels. My knowledge of 40k lore isn't the best to this day, and I do not recall much of what he'd said, but I do remember the part about Blood Angels drinking blood. Ron offered to hang out that weekend and he could show me the 40k universe in more detail, perhaps to look at some armies on his computer, and I agreed, and was excited to see what else they had on offer, as at this point I definitely wanted to get myself some Space Marines. Once the weekend rolled around, I went over to Ron's house. His parents were out a lot, so we'd often have the place to ourselves for an hour or two whenever we hung out. I knocked on the door, as I normally do, expecting to see Ron. I shit you not, my heart almost jumped down my throat when the door opened and there stood a Ron-sized figure wearing a silky red robe. "Enter brother," it said. It suddenly made sense. Ron was fucking wearing his leftover costume from the previous summer's school play, in which he played one of the friars / monks in Romeo and Juliet. Dude, this guy's an oddball, even at this age. To my horror, Ron informed me that I was to be initiated into his chapter, and that I would need to look the part. Sadly for me, Ron only had the one robe from the school play, so instead he gave me one of his hoodies, a red one of course. Because I was a small lad, it was many sizes too big. Ron seemed pleased with it though. I brought my Dark Elves over to show Ron. I remember he didn't really care about them, which kind of disappointed me, as I'd been really proud of the paint job I had done on the few I'd assembled over Christmas. Ron had other plans for today's activity though. I was led into the kitchen where 2 metal camping mugs waited for us on the counter. Ron picked them up and said that this was a part of the initiation. I would need to drink the blood of my enemies. At this point, I was getting a little freaked out. Even at a young age, I knew Ron was a bit strange, and I was worried about what was about to happen. You can imagine my relief when he went to his fridge and got out a cartoon of cranberry juice, with a sticky note fixed to it labelled as blood. He poured us both a drink in the camping mugs and proclaimed, "For the Emperor," and then necked the whole thing. I'd never had cranberry juice before, so I sipped carefully. I now love cranberry juice to this day, so I guess I am a good prospect for the Blood Angels. The rest of the day, we looked at 40k armies online. Ron was very keen for me to get into it, so he'd have an army for his Blood Angels to fight. I pretty much already decided that I wanted Space Marines too, but after seeing Ron's Blood Angels' poor paint job, I wanted to find something that fit my own tastes. I decided that I wanted to paint Raven Guard. Not because I thought of any love of it was cool, but I absolutely loved the black armour. I'd be going shopping tomorrow with my dad, and planned to use my Christmas money to grab a box of tactical Marines. I was so excited, and it was all I could think about for the rest of the day. On my way out, I saw some drawings on Ron's bedroom floor. It was a drawn-in permanent marker on white print paper. Ron's handwriting was horrendous, and the drawings themselves were pretty poor, but it looked, to me, like a comic book. "What's this, Ron?" I asked. Ron quickly picked up his scattered drawings. "It's not finished yet," he said, and nothing more. The following week at school, I brought my newly assembled and painted Space Marines in to show Ron. At this point in my early Warhammer career, these were my best painted models. Black, white, and gold bolter guns, and red eyes. They were definitely not well painted, but compared to my earlier models from when I was even younger, they looked great to me. "Look at these, Ron, I've got Space Marines too. Do you want to have a battle this weekend?" I eagerly asked. Ron's face was like stone. He made no expression as he examined my new models. "You've used too many colours, it's like a rainbow." No, I just copied the pictures I found online. This is what the Raven Guard look like. These extra colours are mostly edge highlights," I replied. I probably should have stopped there. You need some lighter tones on your primary colours to highlight the edges of the models to make them stand out, you know? I said this knowing that Ron's Blood Angels were pretty monotone, almost entirely slathered in red without any care for details. When you looked at our models side by side, it really highlighted the imprecision of my own painting. of his own painting. "I don't have the paints to do that. Give me one of your red paints," he demanded. I could tell he was jealous. How dare I have 3 or 4 more paints than he did? Knowing me, I probably lied to him and let him know I had finished the pot and had nothing to offer. Instead, I said to him, "Why don't you just save some pocket money and get some next time you go out shopping?" I don't remember exactly how the rest of our conversation went, but I do remember Ron ending up in tears and having a tantrum on the school playground. Ron's parents were not by any means impoverished, but he didn't really get a lot of new stuff, at least in his eyes. He was the kid that would get the latest console generation about 2 years after everybody else. That Friday, Ron spoke to me as if nothing had happened. He told me that he had a plan to get some extra money for some new paints. Ron opened his school book bag and pulled out a stack of stapled together printer paper. It was the drawings I had seen the week before. I took one and flicked through. Ron had written about 20 or so a page comic in black permanent marker. Issue 1. I wish I could remember the name of the comic, but I can't now. The comic itself was about a blood angel called Ronius, of course, as he went on missions and killed Xenos. It was shit, but I actually liked reading through it. Ron had produced 4 or 5 more copies. He sent his mum to work with the original drawings and had her photocopy them. His plan was to sell them for 50p an issue to our classmates. To my surprise, some kids bought them. What was even more shocking was that they seemed to enjoy the comic, asking when issue 2 would be ready. Ron explained they would have issue 2 next week for those who wanted to buy it. Most of his customers promised to bring in the money for issue 1 the next week. The only classmate who had the 50p coin to pay for issue 1 was a girl called Anne. Anne had a bit of a crush on Ron and was a bit of an outcast like he was. Most of the other year 6 kids picked on her on account of her looking like a bit like a frog. This is so British. Ron was kind to her though, so I suppose she saw this as her chance to impress him. The following week, Ron brought in issue 2. He sold through his stock. Once again, the only person to pay him up front was Anne. The other customers, being 10-year-olds, had forgotten to bring any money again. Ron hadn't been paid for issue 1, and now he was getting shafted for issue 2. By the time issue 3 was due to launch, Ron had changed strategy. He told everybody they could now pay him in advance for the next handful of issues he planned to produce. Nobody was interested in that, and their interest in the comic had died, except for Anne, who agreed to bring the money in for the next 5 issues the next day. Ron had just invented pre-orders. Ron was off sick the next day and brought the money in to give to him, but obviously he wasn't there to accept it. Instead, she asked me to take it to his house, as Ron and I lived in the same village. I agreed, and handed me £2.50 in mostly shrapnel. 1p's, 2p's, 5p coins, and those not familiar with the term, which I didn't bother to count. After school, I walked over to Ron's house and knocked on the door to give him the money. His mum answered the door, so I passed on the money. "That's for Ron, from Annie for the comics," I said. His mum gave me the strangest look, obviously unaware that her son had been selling his comics at school. "Oh right, thank you," she said. I expected Ron to come into school the following week with issue 3. I didn't have to pay for it myself as I was his friend, and I looked forward to reading them. This week, however, there was to be no issue 3 released, as Ron needed more time to finish it. Instead, Ron came to school with his blood angels, which he had edge highlighted. I suppose he must have banked Anne's money and bought himself a new pot of paint or 2. They looked a lot better, but still very rough. Ron still looked frustrated whenever our models were side by side. The following week rolls around, no issue 3, nor the week after, or the week after that. Ron apparently had lost all interest in the project, and in Warhammer in general. Eventually, I too followed suit, and we stopped playing with our models. Weeks later, I was called to the headmaster's office. This terrified me. I was always well behaved at school. My mum was on the staff, so I knew the bollocking I would get for any trouble when at school. When I go in, the headmaster and my mum are there, and they do not look happy. "Jay, do you know why you are here?" the headmaster asks. I did not know, and was on the verge of tears. "Anne said you took some money off of her a few weeks ago," he tells me. Yeah, that was for Ron. She wanted to buy some comics for him, I explained. Both he and my mum look absolutely bewildered. What in the hell was this kid talking about? I explain in detail as best I can that Ron had been selling issues of his comic and that Anne had pre-ordered some. She had obviously never gotten them, and Ron had not given her the money back. To cut a long story short, my first and only detention in primary school. My mum gave me the worst bollocking of my life, and there was a school assembly about not giving money to other people. Ron, of course, got off scot-free, as I had been the one to take the money. I can only imagine that he denied everything that I had said. And in the eyes of the school, I had been the only one involved. I didn't talk to Ron for a few days. Dude, I wouldn't have talked to him for ages. This guy's a bit of a prick. Even at that age. My God. The next story. A fate worse than death. I didn't touch Warhammer for years, and as I grew up, my priorities changed. Ron and I remained friends to an extent. In high school, I ended up with a few new friends who were more closely aligned with my interests at the time. I was one of the emo kids, and Ron remained a bit of a weird kid who hung out on the fringe of the other friend groups. Okay, let me have a little sip here. We'd drifted apart, but still hung out very occasionally. I only did so in private though. I am ashamed to admit that my social standing was a lot stronger than Ron's in high school. He was picked on for being weird, and thinking back, I should have stood up for him more. I kind of used him for exploring my nerdier hobbies that I didn't want the rest of the school to know about. Eventually, we would both go to different sixth form colleges. I had a girlfriend who went to school 2 towns over, and I decided I wanted to be where she was, typical teenage decision. Ron and I didn't speak much during this phase, but there were some crazy tales to tell, none of which are hobby related. So I'll move on. June 2014 rolls around. I am 18 and, in the autumn, I'll be going to university. Further away than I have ever been before, and ready to start figuring out the rest of my life. My girlfriend and I are not doing well, having been together for 3 years. I spend a lot less time with her, and in a few short months, we would break up forever. I didn't know this at the time, of course. I still lived in the same village as Ron. That's cool. So one night, we both end up in the same village pub. He's happy to see me there. We catch up about old times and tell stories from our childhood as if we are 2 old men talking about the good old days. We had rekindled our friendship. Ron had gotten back into 40k after all these years. He was now into orcs, and showing me pictures on his phone of his new army. They weren't perfect, but much better than what I could do, seeing as I hadn't done painting in many years. I was genuinely impressed. The itch to paint models was coming back to me after so many years. I had all summer and no real plans. Ron could drive, so the next day we went to a Warhammer store together, and I came home with a box of Tactical Marines, a paint starter set, and more brushes than I could ever possibly need. Ron kept putting things in my basket that I would need, but I didn't mind. I was trusting him to get me started. I spent the next couple of weeks only painting Space Marines. Now that I was older, I was very critical of my imperfections, so it took me a long time to even get a single Marine to a standard I was happy with. Eventually, I had a squad of Black Raven Guard Tactical Marines. I was so proud of them and wish I still had the models to this day. I think they ended up thrown out when my parents moved out of my childhood home. Ron and I never played actual 40k before. I would describe the games we played with the models when we were young as just kids playing with toy soldiers and making things up as we went. I had always wanted to get into the gaming side of the hobby though. Neither of us wanted to buy the rule book or codexes, but Ron reckoned he could get the rules for free. I didn't know any better, so I agreed to come round to his house and play a starter game once he had them. A few days later, Ron invites me round and says that he has everything we need to play a game. I am really excited and go to his that evening. I grabbed some beers and cigarettes from the garage on the way over, expecting to have the time of my life. I get to Ron's place and he set the dining room table up with some terrain made from old cereal boxes and paper mache. Doesn't exactly look the part, but I was sure it would do the job. Neither of us wanted to spend any more money at this point anyway, just for a starter game. Okay, so how do we get started? Where are the rules? I ask. Ron hands me a stapled stack of printed paper. What the fuck's this? I say. I wrote down all the rules we need, he says. Ron still had awful handwriting. What I was holding in my hands was essentially a handwritten list of rules and information we needed. 1 copy for orcs, and 1 for space marines. When I asked him how he produced this, Ron told me he had a buddy from 6th form who had the complete collection of rules and codexes and had him take pictures on his phone of the necessary pages. He then emailed them to Ron, who proceeded to painstakingly handwrite the rules out onto packs that we could use. Dude, print them out! Just print them out! I had lost a lot of excitement now. This was not what I was expecting. Ron had gone to the effort though, as poor of an effort as it was, so I feigned excitement and still planned to play, since I was already here. I haven't seen your army yet, Ron says, line them up. I got my tactical squad out and proudly talked through my painting strategy. My favourite had been a marine I modelled to pose when one of his arms was in the air instead of on his bolter gun. In my head, it was supposed to be a sort of rallying cry or a fist pump pose. It was the coolest, most creative part of my squad. Ron had the same stone face he had whenever he was jealous or displeased. He was handling my favourite model. You haven't painted the bases, and these are shit anyway. I have bases with texture and terrain. It completes the look. Yeah, I know, I just haven't decided what to do with it just yet. So I've left them black for now until I figure out what to do, or what I think would be cool, you know? Let me give you one of my cool bases. It's in my room, Ron says. Before I could say anything, Ron rips my Space Marine from the base. Why the fuck did you do that? I shout. I don't want your base. Ron insists that it'll be worth it. The base he just removed is now warped and damaged anyway, so I have no choice but to go along with it. I am fuming though. I've got them in my room, one sec. Ron takes my Marine with him. While he is gone, I check the rest of my squad to make sure the bases are fixed properly. I am thinking that maybe that one had come off so easily because I hadn't glued him right. Ron had been gone a while, so I decided it's a good opportunity to take a quick piss so that we can play when he gets back. I really wasn't in the mood, but I didn't have the balls to just leave. I really wish I had just left at the first sign of that awful rulebook Ron had made. I opened the bathroom door, and the next thing I saw has scarred me forever. Ron was in there, and he had forgotten to lock the door. I am now looking at the back of his head as he is faced away from me. He slowly turns his head, and our eyes meet. He says nothing. I look down, and see his pants are around his ankles, and a pale... Wow. And a pale, hairy pair of arse cheeks staring back at me. Stuck between them is one of the Emperor's bravest, my favourite Marine being crushed to death by Ron's Nurgle arse. Because of the way I had the model, his arm was sticking up in a rallying cry. He now looks as if he is reaching out for help. Oh no. Oh Jesus. Oh God. Oh. It's like he's like, help me, Father. I just from this guy's arse crack. I did not see this coming. I did not see this coming at all. Oh my God. It's been a long time since a hobby nightmare has got to me like this. Oh my God. Oh. Okay, carry on. Oh my fucking God, I say. Oh my fucking God, I say, as I close the door and go back to the kitchen. Ron didn't come out. I pack up my shit and leave. Oh, on my way home, Ron texts me and asks where I went and if I wanted my marine back. He's put a new base on it. Keep it, I text back. I haven't touched 40k since October of this year, and Ron is not involved this time. Oh my god, Ron and I haven't had much to do with each other in adulthood, but are on civil terms. Occasionally, we text, and he still acts like the same jealous prick to me whenever I share what's been going on in my life. New job, moved house, got engaged, etc. I mean, I wonder how he's done. I mean, I know you're going to tell me right now, but like I've been on both sides of this equation, right? I've been the guy who people have been jealous of, and I've been the guy who is also jealous, right? Not jealous, but more like, you know, have you ever had one of those friends where everything just goes well for them, and they just don't seem to like say you're having a hard time in life, right? You're really struggling, but you're keeping it to yourself. You're not saying anything. You're just working at it and trying to get better, right? And then one of your friends just swans through life, and it's like, and then they're kind of rubbing it in your face without meaning to. But maybe they do mean it. You don't know. You're like, do they mean to do this or do they not mean to do this? Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing. Like I've been on both sides of that equation, and it's not fun. Either way, it's not fun. But anyway, Brian, I've never shoved a Space Marine up my arse because I was jealous of a friend. That's something that has not happened. You know. Ron himself has done well for himself. He's got an interesting job, which is reasonably well paid. He has 3 kids and is now a gym bro. He is, from what I can see and on social media, one of the lads. I think he is living what he missed out in high school. He seems really happy, and I am pleased for him. Underneath it all, though, I know the same strangeness lurks, and I bet he's got some funny stories to tell. Thanks for reading, North. I appreciate my stories are a bit bizarre, but I hope you get a kick out of them, even if they don't make it onto the channel. You're damn right they made it on. This is great. What a good way to start the year. Love what you do and look forward to tuning in for future content. All my best, Jay. Dude, that was brilliant. That was excellent. What a way to start the new year, man. What I think this year, one of my New Year's resolutions in 2025, we're going to do a compilation of the best hobby nightmares from 2025 at the end of the year, right? So your December treat in 2025 is to have me read out like the best hobby nightmares from the year, just for you, just on the channel, right? And every single episode we'll see if one makes it into the list, right? I think this one, the very first one of 2025, will make the list. I'm putting it in, right? I will read this at the end of the year as part of the compilation. It will be a massive 2 to 3 hour compilation as a little Christmas present for you next year, right? And well, this year now, in the end of 2025, all right? So this one's made it in. Ron has made it in. He will be a part of that compilation. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow for a bit of 40k rantage, when I'm going to talk about the success of Games Workshop might not be the success that we hope and pray that it actually is. I don't know. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Have a good one. See you later. Bye now.